Live pictures tonight, Kyiv, Ukraine at 2 a.m. Saturday morning. They and the world wait for Russia's next move. Why President Biden tipped his hand today. Good evening. I'm Leland Vittert. Internal Democratic polling numbers show voters find the party preachy. We're going to introduce you to the Democrats who say it is not preachy enough. Plus, live pictures of the Daytona Speedway, 21 years since Dale Earnhardt Sr. died. We get ready for the Daytona 500 and show you how politics is now part and parcel to NASCAR. But first, the most important thing today in the Ukraine crisis happened at the White House. And for all the discussion of troop numbers, sabotage, invasion routes, maps, and Russia propaganda, it is all completely secondary. Listen to this back and forth after Mr. Biden's speech with one reporter talking about Vladimir Putin.
As of this moment, I'm convinced he's made the decision. We have reason to believe that.
To be clear, at this moment, the President of the United States says he is convinced that Vladimir Putin has made the decision to invade Ukraine. Mr. Biden wasn't talking to the American people there. He was talking to Vladimir Putin and the Russian intelligence services, someone who knows a lot about both of those, former National Security Advisor and Ambassador to the United Nations, John Bolton. Good to see you, sir. We appreciate it. All right. Do we really know? And if so, how?
Well, if Biden has intelligence that leads him to believe that, it's hard to second guess it without knowing exactly what it is. But I would say this, up until that statement, every time they have talked about what they think Russia is going to do, they say they have not had real conclusive evidence on a final decision by Putin. And they have essentially been looking at the disposition of Russian forces and concluding from the massive amount of troops and equipment out there that an invasion is likely, sometimes giving time, sometimes not. Now, whether they have more intelligence that they can attribute directly to Putin or not, as I say, we don't know. But I'm a little nervous that Biden is overstating what, in fact, they have. I have no doubt Russia has the capability to conduct an invasion of Ukraine, and I have no doubt Vladimir Putin is fully capable of ordering it. But whether we know that or not, I'm not so sure.
Any chance that for all the talk of Russian disinformation and so much of President Biden's speech was about, you're going to hear this from the Russians, it's untrue, that from the Russians, it's untrue. Any chance this was a little bit of our own head fake or disinformation to try and make Putin think we're a little bit more in the know than we are?
Well, it's possible, and there's, as you say, there's been a lot of it going on, this idea that they're going to do a false flag operation. Again, I'm a little skeptical of that, I have to say. Do you really think sitting in Moscow, Putin is going to say, oh my gosh, they somehow stumbled onto my false flag operation, I guess I'm not going to do the invasion? That's not the way it works. I think there is a question, depending on what this intelligence is, whether we have done our own adequate counterintelligence assessment of it. Maybe this is Russian spin that we're getting. Maybe this is a telephone conversation they let us overhear that's not accurate. But again, bottom line here, nobody should have any doubt what Russia's capabilities are. And if it happens, if there is an invasion, a big one or a small one, nobody should be surprised by it.
You think right now you've got the vice president, the secretary of state, the secretary of defense, all in Germany at this security conference. Does that buy any time, or does that only embolden Vladimir Putin over the next couple of days? Because it's even more embarrassing to the West if you invade while everybody's sitting there talking about what you're going to do if you invade.
Yeah, I don't think that's going to affect his decision. Frankly, I never thought the scheduling of the Olympics would affect his decision.
So what will?
This is something that's going to This is going to be based on what he thinks the best timing for him is. And it may be soon. But on the other hand, what he's doing is also a form of brinkmanship. The White House is, the pulse rates must be astronomical, blood pressure's up. They're clearly nervous. They said last Friday, a week ago today, that the invasion could come within 9 days. And I sense, today's day 7, Saturday's 8, Sunday's 9. They're getting particularly nervous about it. And that's a way that a KGB influence operation works. You get the other side nervous, and talking about getting people nervous, you've got the Europeans nervous, which I think Vladimir Putin sees as the weak point in terms of any sanctions after the fact if he does invade.
Yeah, getting the Europeans nervous sometimes doesn't take all that much. The pictures that we were just putting up on the screen were some of the Russian propaganda that's come out. They said a military vehicle was blown up in Donetsk, which is in the eastern part of the country. They said there was a school that was shelled. It appears as though at least all of these were carried out by the Russians themselves. Russian state TV had this picture of a blown up pipeline that they said the Ukrainians blown up, on and on and on. It is exactly the same playbook as 2014 when I was in eastern Ukraine. I think you and I actually talked a couple of times over at Fox News when that happened. And it felt like so much of Mr. Biden's press conference today was sort of saying to Vladimir Putin, we know your playbook. It's not going to work this time in terms of the propaganda war.
Well, let's be clear. What Biden is trying to do, and it's the appropriate strategy, is to deter the Russian invasion. Now, he has not done it adequately. I don't think he's got the credibility. I don't think he's been able to put enough sanctions on the table to deter Putin. But we have failed if Russian troops come across that border. And I don't think this, what the scholars call semiotic warfare, this signaling and waving things around, is going to deter Putin. In fact, there was a very significant development in Italy today. Reuters reported a few hours ago that Italian Prime Minister Mario Draghi, a very well-respected European politician, said that if the EU imposes sanctions after a Russian invasion, it should not include the energy sector, meaning no sanctions on Nord Stream 2. Now, that's a pretty big hole in the unity of the alliance, and it suggests that others, Germany included, aren't sold on energy sanctions. So to be clear here, we could face a real debacle if Russia does come across that border, again, to take over a piece of the country, which I think is the most likely scenario, or to take over the whole thing. And then we go to impose sanctions and basically come up with something that is really pretty inadequate. The whole world would draw the lesson that NATO has failed.
Well, certainly 2008 and 2014, the sanctions against Vladimir Putin didn't do anything. You talked about the signaling. Here's President Biden sort of signaling we're not going to be swayed by Russian disinformation. Take a listen.
We also continue to see more and more disinformation being pushed out to the Russian public, including Russian-backed separatists, claiming that Ukraine is planning to launch a massive offensive attack in the Donbass.
Do we want him to think that our intel is that good, or is our intel about the Russians actually as good as President Biden's speech today would lead someone to believe?
Well, I think a lot of this information, honestly, is not derived from intel. If you monitor publications or broadcast inside Russia, inside these so-called autonomous provinces inside Ukraine, that's what they're saying. And I think there's no doubt Putin is engaged in a propaganda operation with respect to his own public in Russia, to the culturally Russian populations of Ukraine, which I think are his real targets if there is military action, and to other former republics of the Soviet Union. He just had President Alexander Lukashenko of Belarus in Moscow. You know, Belarus and Russia are going to have joint nuclear exercises tomorrow, which is interesting since Belarus has no nuclear weapons. So Putin is doing a lot of propagandizing, and I think that's what we're looking at. So it's not hidden. It's not telling Putin anything he doesn't already know.
Fair enough. You've been in the Situation Room, obviously, when it's decided what happens on the Sunday shows. President speaks on Friday afternoon. Everybody figures out, all right, what are we going to put out on Sunday? If there is no invasion, it's, hey, look, the president's strong words are continuing to make Vladimir Putin think twice. If there is an invasion, it's some form of our alliance is holding strong. Is there a third talking point that we need to watch for?
Well, yeah, I'll say it again. The potential for a Russian invasion, if they cross the Ukrainian border, or try and expand the areas already held by separatists in eastern Ukraine, that represents a failure of the Biden strategy. The purpose is deterrence. Nobody wants conflict. We're all agreed on that. But if you haven't done enough to convince the Russians that they will pay an unacceptable price, it's no joy in Ukraine to be invaded and have sanctions put on Nord Stream 2. Your country's being ripped apart. And then the worst case scenario is that all of this rhetoric about NATO unity falls to pieces. And again, I refer to Prime Minister Draghi of Italy. If you can't have energy sanctions against Russia, that's a big hole in any sanctions package. So I've always worried that the rhetoric about NATO unity was just that, rhetoric. And I hate to think we're going to find out that Putin has discounted it, didn't give it credibility, and acted anyway.
Yeah, you have to also think in terms of Kamala Harris, Blinken, and Lloyd Austin, whether or not they're the ones that are actually going to bring the Germans and the French together at the table. Mr. Ambassador, it's always good to see you, sir. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching. Click the red subscribe button below so you can get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.